call the Public Works and Highways to order. Our first bill today is House Bill number 561, relative to the transfer of state-owned real property in municipalities. And Representative Murphy, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable committee members. I'm Representative Nancy Murphy, serving my third term representing the wonderful people of Merrimack, Hillsborough 12. I'm happy to be here this morning to introduce HB 561, a bill meant to protect all New Hampshire municipalities that could find themselves on the receiving end of state highway property for which they neither wish to take responsibility nor can afford to maintain and repair. HB 561 would amend sections of RSA 230:57, RSA 4:39, and RSA 4:40 relative to discontinuance of relocated portions of Class 1 and 2 highways, reversion to town, disposal of highway, federal, or turnpike funded real estate, bulk disposal of highway or turnpike funded real estate, and disposal of state-owned real estate. HB 561 has been filed to protect municipalities from state action that would impose an unfunded mandate upon them by way of discontinuing, reclassifying, or reverting New Hampshire's highways to the towns in which they are located, despite opposition from local governing bodies on behalf of their residents. Should such actions by the state ever be allowed and undertaken, an undue and disproportionate potential budget crippling burden would be placed upon impacted New Hampshire's towns and cities, while those from outside the town or city that utilize the highway escape the financial burden associated with highway maintenance and repair costs. This is unjust. Not only is it unjust, it is a clear violation of Part 1, Bill of Rights of the New Hampshire State Constitution, Article 28A. The state shall not mandate or assign any new, expanded, or modified programs or responsibility to any public subdivision, political subdivision, in such a way as to necessitate additional local expenditures by the political subdivision, unless such programs or responsibilities are fully funded by the state, or unless such programs or responsibilities are approved for funding by a vote of the local legislative body of the political subdivision. While New Hampshire citizens and those of us elected to represent them recognize the need to address revenue shortfalls and move forward with fiscally constrained budgets, an unfunded mandate which would target citizen taxpayers in a given municipality is neither just nor equitable solution to the larger budget issue. Granite staters have reached their maximum ability to absorb any additional costs downshifted from state government. Frankly, they've had it. Citizens are paying attention and recognize that the school and municipal portions of the property tax bills they receive that come due every June and December are increasing because the state is downshifting municipal and education costs to property taxpayers. This compounds the unavoidable increases local school districts and municipalities have to include for cost of living adjustments, rising health insurance costs and benefits, contractual obligations, and costs already downshifted from the state to municipalities for things like the New Hampshire retirement system. Citizens have to live within a budget and do not have the luxury of being able to downshift their costs to anyone else. Any attempt by the state of New Hampshire to discontinue, reclassify, or revert New Hampshire's highways to the towns in which they are located is another example of the state trying to pass the buck, or should I say pass the bill, for its responsibilities to municipalities and their citizens. It is time for those in state government to realize that its budget decisions to date have created a situation whereby property tax burdens have surpassed citizens' ability to pay, and residents cannot bear a single other increase to their property tax bills. Across this entire state, overburdened couples, young families, senior citizens, single parents, and first-time homebuyers are receiving property tax bills they simply cannot afford. HB 561 aims to prevent the setting of a dangerous precedent that could, at any time, impact any town in New Hampshire, including the ones that each of you represent. If the state, feeling an economic pinch and revenues are short, should suddenly decide to unload responsibility for its highway property onto a municipality at will, even if the local select board or town council opposes such action on behalf of impacted taxpayers. Discontinuing, reclassifying, or reverting state-owned highways to the town or city in which it is located solves a problem for the state, but creates a much larger problem for a municipality. What kind of slippery slope would that be, and what would be next? As it is our duty and obligation to advocate for the best interests of the citizens we represent, we must protect New Hampshire property taxpayers from being forced to take on and bear the overly burdensome costs and liabilities for state highways that rightfully belong to and should be managed by their owner, the state of New Hampshire. Passing HB 561 will protect the rights of impacted municipalities to refuse receivership of state-owned highways and protect New Hampshire taxpayers from the inequitable and unfair property tax burden that would result if that were to happen, despite the disapproval. I respectfully request your support for HB 561 and would appreciate an OTP recommendation. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I have copies of my testimony I can hand out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, I'd like to recognize Representative Wendy Thomas, please, to speak on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Wendy Thomas, and I represent the town of Merrimack. A state road, by definition, is used by everyone. It's not used by just people in the town. However, allocating the state road to the town makes the town responsible for all of the costs. Representative Murphy did a good job of explaining the problem. All I will say is that disposing of state roads will have a huge impact to our town, as this would be a huge impact to any town. Please know that it's threatening us today, and it could happen to your district tomorrow. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Rosemary Roy, please.
Rung.
I'm sorry, Rung.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Rosemary Rung, and I'm a representative of Hillsborough 12. I want to kind of remind those of you who are not in your freshman year, but if you were here last year, the House, the Senate, and the governor signed into law. It was Senate Bill 539. And I want to read part of that bill because it already establishes a precedent for requiring a governing body to approve transfer of assets. In this bill, it says, upon notice by the department, the governing body shall cause the legislative body to answer the question of whether the legislative body wants to accept the transfer of ownership of the dam. At the same meeting, the legislative body shall consider the issuance of any long-term debt necessary to effectuate the transfer and address any deficiencies. If the legislative body votes to accept the transfer but denies issuance of the debt, the department shall consider that to be a rejection of the offer. So we've already approved in this state a process for transferring state assets. In Senate Bill 539, it has to do with a dam, but this bill has to do with roads. And for the same reasons that this bill was passed, we need to pass, the same reasons that Senate Bill 539 was passed, we have to pass this bill because, as was previously stated, no town or city in this state should have to assume a tremendous cost for something that provides value to the entire state. So I'd like you to consider an OTP motion on this bill. And again, if you want to read what we've already done, please check out Senate Bill 539. It was sponsored by Senator Keith Murphy, co-sponsored by Senator Bradley, Senator Birdsell, Senator D'Alessandro, Senator Carson, Senator Inez, Senator Waters, Senator Pearl, Representative Osborne, Representative Alexander, Representative Mazur, and Representative Carol McGuire. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Representative Cludier,
Okay,
please.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Rung, could you tell me the year that this bill was passed and became law?
It was passed this in 2024.
All right, 2024.
Yeah,
okay.
May 2nd, 2024.
May 2nd. Okay, I will look that up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
But
Chair.
the language is there, and it's very clear the intent is the same as this bill.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Finley Rothaus, please. Welcome to Public Works. Please put your mic on, please.
They should know better. I'm currently chairman of the Merrimack Town Council, and I'm here this morning just to elucidate what we've had to deal with the downshifting of the section of state-owned roadway called Continental Boulevard in our town. A few years ago, there was amendments to legislation to add this release of this road to Merrimack, and it was in a guise to save money for the state of New Hampshire, which I appreciate that desire, but it becomes a downshifting situation. The segment that the state owns is about 2 miles long, and the cost to maintain that roadway, all things considered, would be costing the town of Merrimack about $500,000 a year. We didn't like that. We will be receiving this road in 4 more years. I believe it was 2029. They did pass it this past year as an amendment to the, I believe was part of the budget. But the good thing for Merrimack is that this is a road that serves as a release for Route 101A that travels from Route 101, and I believe it's Milford to Nashua. And 101A was very congested when they built Continental Boulevard. Exit 8 had been constructed to relieve the traffic on 101A, and Continental Boulevard was for the same reason. The only good thing for Merrimack is that when this does become our road, we can shut it down, and that difficulty for the city of Nashua will be great. And I believe it will be taken back by the state, if not sooner. It's a road that is a causeway that gets people from 101A to the Everett Turnpike, and I'm asking you to support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Thank you. This time I'd like to recognize Paul McCauley. Welcome to Public Works.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable board members. Thank you for letting me speak to House Bill 561. While I'm here as the town manager of Merrimack, I believe that this bill will affect the entire state. As a community who's going to be given New Hampshire DOT maintained road in the future, I do not want to see this happen to any other community in the state. Currently, to repave Continental Boulevard, just that 2 mile stretch, DOT estimates are $1.8 million. The fiscal impacts that this will have on the town is anywhere between 2 cents, New Hampshire DOT estimates, versus our 10-cent estimate of $500,000. Like the state, the town is struggling with budget. We know that it is difficult decisions as it relates to public safety, roads and bridges, solid waste, and the general needs versus wants of a community. I am sure I am not the only community dealing with these issues. However, even a 2-cent increase to some of our residents is too much. You will see support from the bill from a number of my colleagues who could not be here today. Please do not let this happen to any other community. It already happened to Newington and now Merrimack, and it's troubling precedent that is being set that NHDOT can just reclassify a road and give it to a community. I do want to leave you with final thoughts. I want you to imagine that if there's roads in your state that New Hampshire DOT, or your town or community that New Hampshire DOT maintains, if they just reclassified it to your community, what will that do? What will that do to the constituents in your party, in your area? Once again, I want to thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. Is there any questions? Yes, Representative Juris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. In the turnover to from the state DOT to the town of Merrimack, in that agreement, is the state going to repave that section of Continental Boulevard?
We have no details of what the state plans to do or not do in that section. This was a committee of conference that came up with this decision. It was run through several boards. The committee of conference came up in the last minute. One of the state senators came up with this consideration, and it was accepted by the committee of conference. We do not have any details of what DOT plans to do in that area. I do know that there are several culverts that probably need to be replaced. There are 3 or 4 traffic lights in that area that are getting old in the tooth. One of them's been updated. The other 2 have not. It's a 2-mile section of road. There are very few, if any, opportunities on that road, considering through that road section, there is Pennachuck Waterworks, which is Nashua's water supply, that owns several acres of land. Fidelity Investments owns several acres of land. So there is no development in that area that potentially can go on in that 2-mile stretch for the town to help offset that cost, unless Pennachuck sells their property or Fidelity sells some of their land, which I do not see happening in the near future.
Okay, one more real.
Follow up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again. And the state, the Turnpike removed the tolls from that area, 10 years ago to relieve citizens of Merrimack, correct?
I don't believe it was 10 years ago. It was several years ago, but I don't know if it was 10 years. I do not have the exact date.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none?
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry,
Question.
Representative Cloutier.
Thank you very much. You referred to something, the town of Newington and another community where the DOT basically forced the communities to accept the reclassified road. What was the other community?
It's Merrimack and Newington.
Merrimack and, okay, all right, Newington. Do you remember Newington when that happened? I could always ask DOT, but I was curious.
I believe that happened in the early 2000s, 2010. My colleague did mention it, and there was some back and forth. They hired consultants to do studies, and there was an agreement that happened between the state and Newington where they replaced and repaved and did a bunch of other things to get the road back. But like I said earlier, that there was none of that discussion with the town of Merrimack. They're just giving us the road.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Steve Labonte, please. Welcome to Public Works, Mr. Labonte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you've just heard, I'm Steve Labonte. I'm with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. I currently serve as the legislative liaison. Some of you may remember my predecessor, Kathy Mulcahy Hampson. Prior to this, I served for 7 years in the Bureau of Right-of-Way. I have my colleague, Eric Sargent, here, who is now the current administrator of Right-of-Way. I'm the former administrator of Right-of-Way. And the Bureau of Right-of-Way is really, it's the real estate section of the Department of Transportation. We're responsible for acquiring property for highway projects. We're also responsible for doing disposal of surplus property. And also we do discontinuance of highway right-of-way when necessary, and we do play a role in reclassifying highways from a class 1 or 2 to a class 5 when it's appropriate. So one thing I want to point out is with the bill, it talks about, and we're here to provide background information as to how the department uses the statutes that are being proposed to be amended. One thing I will say is highways that are in active use are not surplus property. So we wouldn't be disposing of them under 4:39C, 4:39F, or 440, because if it's an active use, it can't be surplus. So what we would do in a situation like that, if it were deemed to be, if the highway section wasn't being used anymore, we might consider doing a discontinuance under RSA 230:55 through :62. And what happens with a discontinuance, most of the time, and in my time at right-of-way, it's usually done when a project will move an intersection, and then the old roadbed doesn't just go away, it has to actually be formally discontinued because it was laid out by a governmental entity, and then it has to be discontinued through that process. So the commissioner may identify that. Oftentimes what happens, like happened in Barrington, is a property owner will come to us because they bought a piece of property. Project happened 40 years ago, so there's no more asphalt there. There's trees growing out of it. But when they went to get their permitting, they realized that there's a highway that runs right across where their proposed front lawn's going to be, so they'll approach the department. This happened at the intersection of Route 202 and 126 in Barrington, where we had a former project many years ago, but that section never got discontinued. So we went through the discontinuance process for this property owner. That is how a discontinuance typically works. In that process, we approach we have to notify the town. The town has 60 days to act. And then if the town does nothing, that section automatically reverts to the town. But if they do, they hold a hearing. They find that that section of road cannot be used for municipal highway purposes. So then we go through the process of doing that. And I will point out the statutory scheme provides for a damaged property owner to bring a claim against the department for damages. So that's typically how that works. So then we get into reclassification. Now, from the testimony I heard, and I'll admit I'm not all that familiar with Continental Boulevard, with Merrimack, but what I heard from the testimony today, that wasn't done by the Commissioner of Transportation. That was done as an act of legislation. So I'm not sure the background there. Typically, a good example of reclassification is Enterprise Drive in Wyndham. If you're traveling south on 93 and you're at exit 3, you see kind of a large clock tower there. That's the end of Enterprise Drive. That was formerly Route 111, back before we went in there and reconstructed that. But after we bypass that section of Route 111, it serves just a local population. So it takes on the character of a local road. So that, in that case, that was reclassified to a Class 5 highway. Now the town of Wyndham maintains it. I will say there was some discussion earlier about an unfunded mandate. The town of Nelson case, the Supreme Court ruled on that and found and determined that it is not an unfunded mandate, and the road does get acted to the block grant money. The town of Nelson case involves Route 9 and 202 in Nelson. Back in the 90s, the department went in there, reconstructed it, bypassed sections of Route 9, 202 that are down by Granite Lake area there, and reclassified it to a Class 5. Town of Nelson took the state to court, and it determined the Supreme Court settled the question that it wasn't an unfunded mandate. So with that, that's how we work. Our concern here would be that if you take that authority away from the commissioner to reclassify roads, and I will say, at the 7 years I was at the attorney, 7 years I've been with the department, I'm not aware that I'm not aware of a reclassification occurring in that time frame. It's not something we do often. It's not something that's done. It's typically done when these projects come in, they bypass a section of road. However, there's still property owners on that road. There's still residents on that road that still need that road to access their property. There it takes on the character of a local road. So if this authority was taken away from the commissioner, what you'd end up with is little bits and sections all around the state that are basically local roads where the department is going to be tasked with their maintenance. And, they're no longer part of the state transportation system. So again, the maintenance priorities are going to be those main roads. So I'm happy to take any questions that any members of the committee may have.
Any questions? Representative Cloutier.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Labonte, do you remember the year of this state Supreme Court decision involving the town of
I
Milton?
want to say it's around 99 or 2000. I can, if you'd like, I'm happy to look that case up. and
If
I
you
can
could, and
forward
send
that
us,
to you.
the committee, any information with the
Will
chair's
do.
permission, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative Newman.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Labonte, I don't believe I heard anything about the town of Newington that was mentioned in previous testimony. I heard Nelson, Barrington. Do you have any information about what
Yeah,
happened in
when we
Newington?
went through and we did that turnpike project, there was a section of it, I'm looking back at my colleague now, Woodbury, you said? Woodbury Road in that area, and it was reclassed. It again took on the nature of a class 5 highway, so it was reclassified as part of the project to a class 5 highway. And again, that as it was testified to earlier, it was around in the early 2000s when that happened.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Mr. Labonte. At this point in time, we will close the public hearing on House Bill 561. It being 10:30, I'd like to call to order the public hearing on House Bill 578 and recognize Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and good morning to members of the House Public Works Committee. For the record, my name is Representative Maureen Mooney of the town of Merrimack, that's Hillsborough County, District Number 12. I'm here as a co-sponsor and in support of passage on House Bill 578, an act erecting a sound barrier along the F.E. Everett Turnpike. I'm here in place today of the prime sponsor, Representative Bill Boyd of Merrimack, as he is ill today with the flu. However, he has emailed to all of you his testimony, which I will read this morning. It's extraordinarily detailed, and I know he's done a lot of work on this legislation. So I'll read it to you at this point, coming from Representative Bill Boyd of Merrimack. Good morning, Chairman Mills, Vice Chairman Melvin, and esteemed colleagues of the Public Works and Highways Committee. I sincerely apologize to all of you that I am not there to introduce House Bill 578, as I am currently home with the flu that hit me very late last night. House Bill 578 seeks to erect sound barriers along the northbound and southbound corridors of the F.E. Everett Turnpike, frequently known as FEET, F-E-E-T, between Raymond Wazorek Drive and Exit 12. As the Department of Transportation begins its widening of the FEET, 17 neighborhoods and 4 condominium complexes will be impacted by the elevated noise decibels that the increased FEET traffic will bring to these locations. House Bill 578 seeks to protect Merrimack's quality of life that will be affected once the FEET widening project is completed. You will hear testimony today from my town manager, Paul McCallie, and town council chairman, Finley Rothaus, along with my legislative colleagues, speaking about the increased FEET noise that is currently permeating these neighborhoods and impacting the quality of life of the people who reside in these neighborhoods. Both Paul and Finley live along the FEET and can speak anecdotally about the noise creep in their respective neighborhoods. It is believed within my community that sound from FEET will only worsen upon its completion. As an offer of proof, it is generally accepted that an ambient noise decibel level in excess of 66 decibels, that's an important number, 66 decibels, is excessive and in need of abatement. There is a 2019 NHDOT environmental study to which noise analysis was performed and identified 17 Merrimack neighborhoods along the FEET with decibel levels greater than 70, greater than the federal standards. That is the number 70. But included only 4 neighborhoods for noise mitigation within the scope of the FEET project. That leaves 13 neighborhoods uncovered. NHDOT's rationale for not including these 13 neighborhoods into the FEET widening project ties into their 2016 noise policy, which factors density into their sound barrier criteria. NHDOT acknowledges that while the ambient noise is excessive in these neighborhoods, noise abatement cannot be provided because sound barrier construction wouldn't reasonably abate the noise based upon the density criteria within the NHDOT's noise policy. As such, I respectfully disagree with the NHDOT's noise policy and their assertion that neighborhood noise abatements cannot be accomplished for these 13 affected Merrimack neighborhoods. Consequently, House Bill 578 is a bill of action that will provide noise relief to the neighborhoods along the feet. In conclusion, I urge favorable support of House Bill 578 to quell the noise creeping from the feet onto Merrimack's neighborhoods. To my esteemed colleagues of the Public Works and Highways Committee, I thank you very much for your time and attention. And again, that's written testimony by Representative Bill Boyd of Merrimack, a member of your committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your attention. We would hope that you would recommend House Bill 578 ought to pass.
Thank you, Ms. Mooney, and I understand you have another bill to present somewhere else, so I'm going to forego any questions for you, seeing as you basically just had Representative Boyd's testimony. So thank you for coming.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, being sensitive of my time. Thank you.
Senator McGow, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me next. I appreciate it. It's a full day for all of us. Full evening as well. It's budget committee day in Merrimack. I'm Senator Tim McHugh. I represent District 11, which includes the communities of Merrimack, Milford, Amherst, and Wilton. And I'm here today on behalf of the residents of Merrimack in support of House Bill 578. If it were only just the feet and the pitter patter of little feet and not the deafening highway noise. Yes, feet stands for Effie Everett Turnpike, as I'm sure you all know by now. But the only thing more deafening than the highway noise are the calls and emails that all of the legislators of this district have been getting due to the unexpected, and yes, I do say unexpected. I lived on Back River Road at one point, and I can tell you we never could have possibly predicted the deafening level of noise. And I lived on the other side at one point. We could not have possibly predicted. We did know, of course, that eventually there would be improvements to this infrastructure. I commuted south to Boston and to Wakefield, Massachusetts, and we knew that the Route 3 would be widened and someday progress wouldn't be impeded. But it was most definitely impossible to predict the level of clear cutting right up to the edge of the property. These individuals, some had foresight, sold their properties, moved away, and were lucky enough to get out from underneath their investments. But I'm here for these residents experiencing unexpected impacts from the highway noise following the recent highway construction. No one could have expected what they are enduring on a daily basis in their backyards. House Bill 578 seeks to address these concerns by creating a noise sound barrier going beyond the typical guidelines. So why should we do that? We do have guidelines. These guidelines have evolved over the years. They certainly are different than when some of these longtime residents purchased their properties. So in standard highway projects, as I'm sure you all know, there are usual formulas and measurements that have served us well. Yet our current situation does call for some flexibility in protecting these communities from this excessive noise. There are clear precedents that exist in New Hampshire demonstrating a commitment to address the community concerns even when strict formulas fall short. For example, during other budget years, yep, it's a budget year, I know. In 2016 budget year, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation approved an alternate design along the I-93 corridor near Hooksett. Another busy community, another economic hub. Community members protesting increased noise levels in their neighborhoods spurred project engineers into developing a modified noise barrier design. They prioritized, like I'm asking you to do, they prioritized public well-being over strict adherence to the standard criteria. In another instance, in the 2018 budget year, the DOT teams in neighboring counties adjusted noise barrier parameters to manage unexpected noise impacts from highway expansion. I'm asking you to do the same thing. Merrimack residents face a particularly challenging situation. Recent highway construction has introduced a level of noise intrusion unanticipated by traditional planning models. It disrupts their daily routines. They might be staying indoors right now. We all might be staying indoors when it's sub-zero out. But they want to go outside and enjoy their fire pits, mow their lawns in peace, plant their gardens, and they can't do it. Homeowners that are enduring this sudden change deserve the special consideration that this delegation is asking for. They would like you to help them preserve the quiet enjoyment they've long expected and long enjoyed. I'm asking you to act outside the norm in this instance and recognize that rigid adherence to the formulas sometimes overlooks the human element, an element fueling community value and upholding property owner rights. Listening to the residents recount experiences of sleepless nights, strained relationships, and declining property market values reinforces the urgency of this matter. In communities like ours, noise is not merely a nuisance. It is a threat to the quality of life and economic stability. So if we rely on past alternative approvals, and we trust local input, we understand the immediate and long-term consequences of increased highway noise. We can together create a solid foundation for you to vote House Bill 578 ought to pass. Send it over to me in the Senate. I'll take care of it from there. I hope. I think I can do that for you. Legislators should act now to provide timely relief. We hope that a flexible approach in permitting noise barriers will help protect residents and preserve their property value, even when it's necessary to depart from the standard criteria. And I realize that's a tall ask, but it's been done before, not once, but at least twice in budget years. So I respectfully urge you, Mr. Chairman, and your committee to support House Bill 578. And I thank Representative Boyd and my colleagues from the Merrimack delegation for bringing this bill forward. And I thank you for your favorable support. And I'm going to defer questions to some of the experts behind me. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
Take care.
I'd like to recognize Representative Wendy Thomas again, please. Welcome back to Public Works.
Mike?
Microphone, please.
I am sorry. In case you missed it, it's always a pleasure to be here. I am Representative Wendy Thomas, and I represent the town of Merrimack. I am in support of House Bill 578. In the town of Merrimack, we understand that the highway needs to be expanded. We understand the increased traffic in our town and the headaches that go along with it. We understand that this will require patience on our part. We get it. But what we don't understand is why our homes, where we live, where we raise our families, are not being considered for quality of life protections as a result of this expansion, especially when data indicates that there is a direct impact. This bill makes sense. Go ahead and expand the highway. Go ahead and do it. We agree with it. But if it impacts the residents' quality of life, please, please take care of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Thomas? Seeing none,
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Representative Nancy Murphy, please. And I assumed it was 578 because you listed 568. Oh, gotcha.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Public Works.
Good morning and thank you. Again, I'm Nancy Murphy, representative of the town of Merrimack. I'm here to speak in favor of HB 568. HB 568 is a bill important to many Merrimack residents whose lives and peace have been negatively impacted by the necessary expansion of the F.E. Everett Turnpike. I think we'd all agree, including the homeowners that have been negatively impacted in the process, that the turnpike needed to be expanded. That said, some residents have been unfairly burdened by this expansion in terms of increased road noise at all times of the day and night. They have reported disruptions to their sleep, diminished ability to have conversations outside, and this is still winter, impacted view and exposure of their homes to the roadway. I'm here to support impacted residents who seek a return to the quality of life that will keep them in New Hampshire. The F.E. Everett Turnpike is a thoroughfare for people from out of state to visit and spend their tourism dollars here in the Granite State, and for New Hampshire citizens to travel far and wide. Turnpike improvements, however, should not come at the expense of diminished quality of life for residents along that route. Though I understand that this committee will be voting on the policy of building sound barriers and not the fiscal note, I recognize that building sound barriers also comes at a cost to the state. If the state had placed tolls at the border and along the most highly traveled areas of the turnpike many years ago, the revenue collected by user fees would have been more than enough to cover the cost of sound barriers along the highway where they're necessary. Given the budget challenges New Hampshire's facing, taking such action even today remains an option for consideration to help fund appropriate sound barriers for the area identified. HB 568 would help alleviate a problem that we can and should solve on behalf of our citizens. I ask that you support this bill so that Merrimack residents whose peace has been interrupted can once again enjoy the peace and comfort of their homes. Please vote OTP. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Thomas? Representative Brown?
Mr. Chairman, someone indicated a little while ago that they would be able to expand on some of the issues in regard to, let's say, the decibel levels and that type of thing. I don't know if this representative has that information or who would have that so that we can ask that question at some time, whether it's
We can ask
DOT or
the
not.
DOT to
Okay. Thank you,
at
Mr.
that time. Representative Juris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for being here today. Can you tell us a little more about the barriers? Are they a wood and concrete hybrid design? Are they totally wood? How tall?
Representative Juris, let me interrupt you on this one. That's not her purview, and that would be up to DOT, and there's various
Fair enough.
types of barriers that can go up. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Seeing that, thank you. And I would like to recognize Representative Rung again. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee. For the record, my name is Representative Rosemary Rung. I represent Hillsborough 12, which is the town of Merrimack. And like my colleagues have previously stated, I get a lot of calls from my neighbors in Merrimack regarding the sound. And my home actually abuts one of the neighborhoods, Vista Way and Roundtree, which are listed in the bill. And this summer, I happened just to walk down the street, and it was unbearable. I know this is only anecdotal, but I would think that the measurements, if they were taken today, would show a much increased impact than when this project was first planned back in the, it had to have been like 2014, 2015. And there are flaws in those measurements. I think in two sources I think are true. One is that with the clear cutting of trees that have been done in preparation for the additional lane, the sound has increased substantially. And I suspect that the role that trees plays in dampening sound was underestimated during the initial measurements, because without those trees, it's very loud. Also, in the measurements, it assumes that people are only entertaining or spending time outdoors in their backyards. Many of these homes face the highway, and many people entertain in their front yards. They may have porches, or they may have more property in their front yard where they could put up a tent or a fire pit or do entertaining. But when I had a conversation with someone who's working on this project, they said, no, we calculate the impact point is on the other side of the house. And I don't really believe that that should be true. Many, many people, when they come and go from their home, they're entering from their front door, from the front of the house to get to their car. So I really think that we need to examine how we take those measurements. And I think what I consider the flawed way is what led to the decision that these neighborhoods don't deserve to have sound barriers. And I want, there was actually in the planning stages, there was a neighborhood off of Clay Street. It's a little bit south of the neighborhoods that are identified in this bill, but they disagreed with the measurement. They hired their own sound engineer who showed that it was mismeasured, and the state did add that neighborhood to their plans. And I really don't think it should be up to having people in a neighborhood having to raise their own money to hire a sound engineer to correct a measurement of the state. So that's another concern I have. And get to Representative Juris's point when he brought up the whole issue of tolls. The Everett Turnpike is a turnpike. It relies on user fees to fund its maintenance, repairs, and any capital projects. The first 21 miles of that turnpike has no user fees. From the state line of Massachusetts up until the Bedford tolls, people use that turnpike freely without contributing any costs. The busiest part of that turnpike is in Nashua, where the state has invested tens of millions of dollars for a new bridge to Hudson, for exit ramps, for increased lanes. And there were plans for a toll booth there. And there's even a tunnel that goes underneath the turnpike to accommodate that. And yet I don't know the history of that, but that was canceled. And the state did realize years ago that they needed to charge user fees to the users. And yet, and with all due respect to my colleagues from Nashua, it created such an unfair situation, and a great burden was placed on the people of Merrimack for decades, where they were paying for all of that use from exit ramp tolls. So I would like to have the committee to support this bill 578, and I think that in the future, is particularly as you start looking at the 10-year transportation plan, to incorporate fairness in the way that we fund our turnpikes. They are supposed to be self-funded, but there's such an imbalance of burden. And if it was fair, the money to erect these sound barriers would be able to be covered easily with that toll revenue. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Representative Bogert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to ask my question, and thank you for taking my question. If I understood correctly, and I could have misinterpreted what you were saying, that where we collect, in order to help pay for some of this stuff, because that's outside of where the tolls start, should we move the tolls closer to the state line? Is that what's being indicated, so that we could gather the funds to help pay for these sound barriers?
I agree. A turnpike is user fee funded, and if I'm going to use the turnpike, I would think that it's reasonable that I should help pay for that. I don't believe people in the North Country or people on the Seacoast should pay for a turnpike, because we've defined that as a turnpike. It's not a state road under DOT. It's under the turnpike system. I believe it's fair to expect people that are using it to pay for it, and that's why tolls were proposed at the state line at exit. I think it was around Spitbrook Road. If you drive down that way, you can see that there were toll booths planned. The road is very wide around there. People in the know about the tunnel, but it was canceled at the last minute. Like I said, I don't know the history of that, but that was a fair way of collecting user fees from users to pay for what they were using.
Representative Melvin.
Thank you for taking my question. Could you tell me how many residents that affects?
Oh, in the neighborhoods outlined here, I don't have a specific number, thousands, I would say. And I also think, I know Representative Mooney, when she was sharing Representative Boyd's testimony, they talked about the density factor. And anecdotally, I know there are plans for some residents to have accessory dwelling units, an in-law apartment, something similar to that. And so I think if we're just looking at single-family homes, that's not an accurate reflection of density, because it may underestimate the actual number of residents that might be in a single-family home, if you know what I mean.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to please recognize Representative Julie Miles next, please. Welcome to Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Representative Julie Miles, and I represent the town of Merrimack. In an effort not to be redundant, I will keep this very brief. I am a legislator committed to the well-being of our constituents, and I'm here to advocate for the installation of sound barriers along the Everett Turnpike in Merrimack. I understand that previous assessments concluded that Merrimack didn't meet the necessity criteria for the sound barrier installation along that portion. However, it's important to recognize that the environmental conditions are not static. With ongoing development, increasing traffic volumes, noise levels are likely to rise, potentially surpassing the established thresholds in the very near future. Proactively addressing this issue now will prevent further degradation of our residents' quality of life. It's also worth noting that communities have been granted sound barrier protection in other similar circumstances. And for instance, Bedford, just down the turnpike, has been benefited from some sound mitigation measures to relieve its residents' distress. The people of Merrimack deserve the same consideration. They did not choose to have the turnpike widened, although yes, it was necessary. They did not choose to have a major highway expansion bringing traffic closer to their homes. But now they are living with the consequences, and one of those is the lack of privacy. As you're driving along the highway now, some of those homes, you can see directly into their windows. By supporting House Bill 578, we can take a proactive step to ensure Merrimack citizens are afforded the same protections as those in neighboring communities. Waiting for conditions to further deteriorate before taking action would be a disservice to the families who have already endured this much. I urge the committee to consider the involving environmental factors and precedent set by other towns, and to support the House Bill 578 for the well-being of Merrimack residents. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, I would like to recognize Paul McCauley again. Welcome back to Public Works.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, honorable members. Thank you for letting me speak to House Bill 578. As you know, I am the town manager of Merrimack. I have lived on the F.E. Everett Turnpike for 31 years. I bought my home knowing the property backs into the turnpike. Over the last 31 years, the noise coming from the turnpike has increased. Whether it's trucks using J-brakes, motorcycles racing up and down the F.E. Everett Turnpike, public safety sirens, or just cars with high-performance mufflers, the noise has increased. I live about 1,500 feet from the turnpike. I have several acres of woods in between me and the turnpike. My backyard now, when I have my dog out there, I cannot even hear her sometimes barking because of the noise on the turnpike. I want to make you aware that I am not personally benefiting from this bill that requested the sound barriers. As you have heard, Town of Merrimack has 17 neighborhoods along the F.E. Everett Turnpike with noise analysts of over 70 decibels, but only 4 of those neighborhoods have had sound barriers included in the scope of the project identified in the 2019 report, Nashua Merrimack Bedford 13761 Final Environmental Study. Vista Way was identified as one of those areas that was well above the decibel level for the sound barrier at 74. However, Vista Way did not meet the barrier area per benefited receptor S square foot of less than 1,500 square feet benefited household. In order to meet the cost effectiveness criteria, Vista Way was at 3,654, or 2.43 times higher than the threshold requirements that was established in 2016 before COVID. I do have a couple of questions. Is this a federal regulation for sound barriers, or is it a state standard? Why are we using standards established prior to COVID? As we all know, the world has changed since COVID. In closing, I have had residents tell me that when they're walking in the Vista Way area, they have to turn the volume up on their phones all the way and still cannot hear the music or ebooks in their earbuds. I believe that there is a quality of life issue that should be taken into account for these neighborhoods. I also believe the sound will only get worse once the Effie Everett Turnpike is widened and that tree buffer is diminished. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you and have a great day.
I would like to recognize the Honorable John Graham. Welcome to Public Works, sir. Long time no see.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I am John Graham. I live in Bedford, and I represented Bedford in the House for a couple of decades. And I was chairman of this committee. I can answer a couple of the questions. I'll tell you why the Nashua toll was ever built when they was planned. It was taken out the same way the Merrimack tolls have been taken down through legislative action. The deputy speaker at the time was from Nashua, and she convinced everybody in the House that it was a bad idea to put them right on the border. So that answered that question. What I have passed out is a bill that I submitted when I was chairman of this committee to do sound barriers along one neighborhood in Bedford, T-Berry Lane. It was not the first time. Now Senator Murphy worked on it for a couple of years when he represented Bedford in the House. It was found inexpedient to legislate over my objections because of the density policy. So if you want to consider this current bill in a favorable manner, I ask that you amend it to include T-Berry Lane, and I am sure that those on the seacoast along the Turnpike, which is I-95, the Spalding, and others, would also like to have sound barriers put up because they have had separate bills in before to do sound barriers. Yeah, it's going to be an expense on the Turnpike. And I'll tell you right now, the Turnpike is solvent, sort of. Yeah, Truth in Lending, I'm chairman of a special commission set up by this legislature, the General Court, to look at funding of our highway fund and Turnpike fund. We are having meetings on that. So it's a long-term problem. If you're going to do anything, you've got to include everybody. You can't just have separate bills for separate areas. Yeah. Would I like to see T-Berry Lane have their sound walls? Their decibel readings are higher than the ones that are being reported from Merrimack. So if you're going to do that, please do that. And remember that the Turnpike system is more than just the Everett. It is on the seacoast as well. I think you all got a briefing from DOT on exactly what the Turnpike system was earlier last January. So please do what's right. If you want to turn this into a committee to look at what the policy is, that's fine. But if you order this out as ought to pass, I ask that it be ought to pass as amended with not just T-Berry Lane, but those areas on the other portion of the Turnpike over on the seacoast so that we can find out what the true magnitude of the problem is. And I'll try to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Graham? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony, sir.
You're welcome.
And last but not least, I'd like to recognize from the DOT, Mr. John Evans.
Good morning. My name is John Evans. I'm the Noise Program Manager for the Department of Transportation. I have spoken with many of you in the past, and I'm here to kind of provide a bit of background and then possibly help clarify some of the comments or questions that were brought up by previous testimony. The Department of Transportation, as part of the environmental review process for the Everett Turnpike expansion project, did complete a noise study for the entire length of the Everett Turnpike expansion project between the towns of Nashua and Bedford. So that includes Merrimack as well as any of the gap, what we call the gap sections, where the turnpike has effectively already been widened through prior projects. That study identified 25 separate locations in need of potential evaluation for potential noise impacts. Of those, there were noise impacts identified in 20 separate locations throughout the corridor, and barriers were and noise. There were noise impacts identified at approximately 289 properties throughout the corridor. Noise impacts, as was stated previously, noise impacts are identified as anything in excess of the Federal Highway noise abatement criteria, which in this case here is 66 decibels. The reason 66 decibels is used is because 66 decibels is the limit at which, average human speech, if I'm sitting having a conversation with you face to face, generally speaking, over an average hourly period, 66 decibels would be the average over that period. So therefore, noise levels in excess of 66 decibels are considered to be an impact on that area because the ambient noise levels are louder, and thus it requires people to speak up to be able to have a conversation. So when the Department of Transportation when we do complete one of these noise evaluations, we identify noise impacts, then the next step is to identify if there's potential abatement measures which can be implemented to help alleviate those noise levels. Those typically come in the form of a noise barrier or a berm, a mound of dirt. And the idea is being that if you interrupt or place something between the noise source and the area you're trying to protect, it will provide noise reductions. It will not eliminate noise altogether. It simply reduces the amount of noise. So the department completed that noise assessment, and I should add too that when we determine noise impacts, we actually it's a common misconception that we complete noise measurements at each individual home. We do not, and the main reason being is because we're actually required by the Federal Highway Administration for federal aid projects, and then our policy, in order to be fair and equitable, follows the same process for the turnpike system as well, is to evaluate noise impacts that would result from the project using traffic noise levels that are 20 years out into the future upon completion of the project. So in this case here, noise impacts were identified using under the build conditions of the project using traffic volumes that are anticipated to exist in the year 2044. So it's important to note that some of the noise impacts that were identified are those which have not yet been experienced. But nonetheless, in order to identify that we are properly identifying noise impacts and environmental impacts, we evaluated impacts throughout the entire corridor under those conditions. We then can utilize the noise modeling software, which is used by all 50 states to identify noise impacts and potential abatement measures to identify where noise barriers would be both feasible and reasonable. The policy requires us to identify feasibility and reasonableness because there are certain circumstances where placing a noise barrier may not either be feasible from an engineering standpoint. It may not actually provide any benefits at all, or there may be some other, say, environmental constraints or engineering constraints that simply make it such that you could not build a noise barrier and provide any benefits. And reasonableness is, and this is the one that I think is probably was kind of at the focus of prior testimony, relates to, is it reasonable to build a barrier? In some circumstances, in order to build a noise barrier, you may need a very large barrier and it'll provide very little benefits. The department, obviously, resources are restricted, and so these noise barriers are extremely expensive. They cost upwards of $100 per square foot of surface area, essentially. And so in order for us to ensure that we are providing noise barriers at locations that are going to provide the most benefit, we have what's called a reasonableness criteria. The reasonableness criteria includes a calculation which essentially, when you put into the noise model, you can figure out how many square feet of barrier you would need to provide noise reductions at impacted properties and some properties that may not be impacted but would still be benefited, would receive noise reductions. That's what a benefit is. And if there are so we put those into the model, and the model can predict what the noise levels would be with that barrier, and you kind of play around with the height and the length, and you identify the optimal barrier. That would be the barrier that provides the most benefit for the least amount of barrier, because that'll be the most effective barrier, essentially. The department has an effectiveness criteria of 1,500 square feet per benefited receptor. Receptor being, for residential areas, that would be a single family home or multifamily home. If you have a multifamily home, say with a duplex with two, then that would represent 2 receptors. So you take that, the square footage of the barrier, divide that by the number of benefits, and that gives you the square foot per benefiting home. And if that number exceeds 1,500 square feet per benefited receptor, then it's considered to be unreasonable, and a noise barrier would not be constructed at that location. Within the corridor of the Nashua Merrimack Bedford project, there were a total of 13 locations which were identified as required, where we have identified potential noise abatement measures. Of those, only 7 were found to be feasible and reasonable. All of those were as a result of the effectiveness criteria not being met, and that is the case for Roundtree, the Roundtree neighborhood, as well as the Back River Road neighborhood. And again, the main reason being we're not getting enough benefits to provide a barrier that's considered reasonable in accordance with the department's noise policy. I would add that the department's noise policy, that reasonableness criteria, is required by all 50 states to have a reasonableness criteria. The department does get to set that, and the department's we've reviewed that in relation to the other states, and we're in the half of states that are generally more barrier friendly on construction. There are other states that have a much higher reasonableness criteria, and therefore more barriers are less likely to be constructed in those states. States like Vermont and Maine are among those that have much higher requirements. And then there are other states, say like Maryland or Virginia and whatnot, that may provide more may have reasonableness criteria that are lower and thus are more likely to be to provide noise abatement. And again, the Department of Transportation here in the state of New Hampshire, we're in the middle of the road, if not leaning towards states that are more commonly thought of as being states that do allow for barrier construction when it's reasonable. But I would note that there were 20 locations that were reviewed with noise impacts, and there were various noise abatement measures that were identified, but again, only 7 of those were identified as feasible and reasonable. Of those, those 7 locations alone are going to require approximately $20 million, $19 million to be which has been included and will be constructed as part of this project. If we were to implement noise barriers at the other remaining locations to be that are impacted, it would require another an additional $24 million within just this corridor to construct those additional noise barriers that do not meet the department's feasibility and reasonableness criteria. So with that, I'm sure that there's probably some questions, and I'd love to answer them. And I know that everybody's time is valuable, so I'd like to open that up.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Representative Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for appearing. We've heard several times that we ought to adopt a policy that we're going to throw away the density criteria and just build them wherever people think they need them. What would Federal Highway say if we did? First of all, these standards are Federal Highway standards, not made up by the DOT. And what would they say if we started to do that?
So it's important to note that this project is a turnpike funded project. So in this case here, we don't need federal approval for those types of projects on the turnpike system. But what we have done in order to be equitable across the entire transportation network of the state of New Hampshire is we've applied the same policy that is required of the federal government, of Federal Highway Administration, to our entire system of roadways, regardless of whether or not they're turnpike funded or federally funded. In the case of if this were a federal road and we did not have a noise abatement criteria, that reasonableness criteria, we would not get an approved noise policy, and that means we would not be able to construct any projects on the federal system within the state of New Hampshire using federal dollars.
Further questions, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions, but if you could just go back to what you just said about if we exceed the benefit, basically, of what we've agreed to, the 1,500 criteria.
Yep.
What was that reasoning? We would not get federal funds to do any other noise abatement projects in the state? Is that what you said?
So what you're saying is, so essentially what you're asking is, if we didn't have having a reasonableness criteria is required of us in the federal regulations. Our noise policy must adhere to all the requirements of the federal requirements. If our noise policy doesn't comply with the requirements within the federal regulations, then we would not have an approved noise policy, and we would not be able to seek environmental approvals to construct any projects on the federal system within the state of New Hampshire. So effectively what that means is we would not be able to accept federal dollars to construct any road project within the state of New Hampshire until we had a project that demonstrated compliance with the federal regulations, which includes compliance with the department's noise policy.
Follow up.
So in this, I think it was a 1,500 number that you referred to.
Correct.
And some states have a lesser requirement, some states have a higher requirement. Yep. So does that fall within the federal guidelines? In other words, do they say 1,500 or 1,200 or 1,000? Does that make any difference?
Yes. So they just indicate that it needs to be, we need to have some way of fairly and equitably identifying reasonableness. And they say that it needs to be either based upon a cost per square foot or a square foot per benefited receptor. If you look at our past noise policies, we used to have noise policies that had utilized a cost per square foot. And the problem with utilizing a cost per square foot is cost, as everybody knows, you have inflation and costs of construction go up. You're constantly having to reevaluate the costs, but then at the same time, you end up increasing the cost per square foot number to adjust. So essentially, if you do the math, it comes back. It has always, the department's effectiveness criteria has always been 1,500 square feet per benefited receptor, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I have two very short questions.
Very short,
Thank you.
please.
So in regard to the criteria that the other representatives spoke about, that since the trees have been cleared, basically that the noise levels have gone up significantly. So have those sound decibel levels been verified since the trees have been cleared so that it would potentially impact this significantly?
So again, we utilize a noise model to identify noise impacts, and we're using it under the constructed conditions. Now, in order to be sure that we've identified any potential noise impacts and truly identified the benefits of noise barriers, we actually typically the noise model is we can add noise. What we call sound zones, and in this case here, like tree zones or say a row of buildings or something like that can actually be added into the noise model. But as a rule of thumb, and for this project, we did not model with any trees at all. So what that effectively means is, regardless of removing those trees or not, we're getting noise levels that are as though there were no trees there to begin with, and there would be no trees there to end with.
Great.
So essentially, it's identifying all potential noise impacts that would be within that corridor.
Okay. And then the final question. So are those decibel reports available to the public for them to view based on your 1,500 criteria to show, for instance, that these neighborhoods have 1,500, these other ones have 1,400 or whatever, to show the discrepancy in where those would be, so that if there was some concern that might be a neighborhood right next to another one, that maybe that barrier should be continued just in that area to also continue with that abatement?
So so as part of the environmental process for the environmental review process for the Everett Turnpike project, we completed an environmental study of the entire corridor. That study includes the results of the noise analysis that was completed for this project. So which highlights all of those things you're asking for.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your tolerance.
Representative Faulkner for the final question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have the flexibility to offer something? Is it all or nothing, barrier or nothing? Or can you offer noise mitigation measures that are short of providing a full noise barrier, such as triple glazing windows or stockade fences or things like that?
So the answer is effectively no. If you're providing noise abatement, it needs to provide noise benefits. We also do not, and the Federal Highway Administration requires that when you mitigate for noise in residential areas, it's for exterior areas only. So windows and those kinds of things would not be something that would be in potential of noise abatement for a residential area. We do get a lot of questions for, say, the installation of privacy fences. I know one of the former speakers that spoke earlier did mention privacy fences. Privacy fences do not provide noise benefits. They're not noise mitigation. Sometimes they're installed in areas where, say, there are property impacts or something that are causing, the property impacts, physical property impacts to that property. Say we're putting in some type of a water quality treatment, basin or something like that there. They've removed a bunch of trees that were providing privacy or something like that. That's kind of dealt with on a case by case basis, property by property based, upon right of way discussions, during that process. But generally speaking, we do not provide wholesale, privacy fences, and they're certainly not intended to be any type of noise mitigation.
Thank you for the information, Mr. Evans. I'm sure we're going to invite you back when we exec this bill so that you can answer any and all and how many hours worth of questions we might have.
I'm happy to come and speak for at many hours if you wish.
I'm sure you will. Thank you. At this time, I close the public hearing on House Bill 578. And moving right along, quickly trying to catch up to our schedule, I'm going to open the public hearing on House Bill 713 relative to mile markers along Route 112.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to introduce House Bill 713 in relation to mile markers along Route 112. My name is Jerry Stringham. I am the representatives from the towns of Lincoln, Woodstock, Easton, and Livermore. Livermore is 97% federal land. It's the largest physical town in my district and has no voters. But what it does have is Route 112, the Kankamangas Highway, which I think most of you probably have driven on at some point. The Kankamangas Highway is 36 miles long. It's a beautiful road. It's the part of the road that we're talking about here as Lincoln and Woodstock in the western part and the southern part of the towns of Conway in the eastern part. The road itself is a national treasure and a destination many times of year, particularly during the leaf changing season, when New Englanders and those from other parts of the country flock to see our beauty at its glorious. It's a very windy road with constant turns and hills. It's a destination for sightseers, hikers, and campers. It includes such destinations as Lincoln Woods with Franconia Falls, Sabaday Falls, some of our 4,000 footers, including the Hancock Mountains and the Osceolas, and has more than a dozen campgrounds along it. So, while we bring here, there are safety issues with this road. There's basically no cell phone service along most of Route 112 in that section. So, and people do get in trouble. The roads are very hilly. There's a hairpin turn. The grades are 9% and up. Should something happen like a breakdown or an accident, or when the weather's bad, even sliding off the road, there's no direct ability to ask for help. So typically what happens when a car or bicyclist or truck gets into trouble, a Good Samaritan offers to help, and of course they can't call either. So they proceed down the road until their cell service kicks back in. And by the time they've gotten there, they may have driven 5 to 10 miles because the stretch of road with little cell service is over 20 miles long along that road. At that point, the details get a little foggier sometimes, and it's hard to relay what's going on. So House Bill 713 seeks to better the odds that our neighbors and visitors will get timely help in the unfortunate circumstances that occur very, very frequently along this highway. And it does so by putting mile markers up there so that when somebody notices trouble, they have more of an ability to relay what's going on. If there's one time you're going to notice the mile markers is when you're driving away from something and you're trying to make a mental note of where the help is needed. 3 different organizations have asked for this bill. The Lincoln Police, who are here and can speak about circumstances that they've fallen into, will be here. The Linwood Ambulance Service, which is called on dispatches, and one of the things they mentioned is it can even be harder in busy times because not only do you not know where to go, but there can be some pretty heavy, slow traffic. So it can make a big difference on how long they can respond. And then finally, the emergency vehicle services are towing companies. And Arnold's Towing, I know, was hoping to be here today, but they responded to 3 calls last night between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Up toward Franconia Notch and so on. So, but they did want me to mention that they emphasize that people have, especially people who don't drive the Kank very often, have a great deal of difficulty of describing where it is that they noticed a breakdown or somebody in trouble. Separately, I'd like to mention that some of the service organizations, basically the Rotary Club in Lincoln on the west side and the Rotary's Conway office, Conway Rotary Club, both have mentioned that this is something that they'd like to see and be willing to help if it helps reduce the cost. It's certainly not something, this is a major public safety and it should be done right and engineered properly. It's not something that a service organization can do the entire amount. But for example, one thing mentioned in the budget is that there's $65,000 of traffic control, presumably when the 36 or so mile signs would be put up, who's going to make sure that the cars stop at the appropriate time. Both of these organizations clean the Kank at least once a year. So they block off, they have big signs at each end of the Kank, be careful, and you can find pictures of people like myself with big yellow vests on and picking up loose trash and, making this kind of a permanent improvement to the public safety for those who come to our towns, would be certainly something that might help reduce the overall cost of this. Although I think, primarily here, we're going to be talking about just the advisability of it and hopefully getting your support. So in summary, the Kank is a beautiful, iconic highway that draws visitors and out-of-staters to our towns and our restaurants and our hotels. And I hope you'll support House Bill 713 and send it over to the Finance Committee where I serve. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Representative Brown.
I just have a quick question. I spend a lot of time up there hiking and taking friends that visit from out of state up there all the time. So in the winter up there, those snowbanks are pretty high. I know you stick up the tree branches up there to enable the plows to it. So these are going to have to be specially constructed road marker signs, I assume, taller than normal.
Yeah, I don't know if this, the banks are pretty high along I-93 too.
Yeah.
There's, I think one of the factors is, how they should be designed. How can we make them blend with the natural beauty of the highway and, not just be, big and ugly, I guess. But what is the right height? There was talk about having a contest. Maybe they should be silhouetted and look like the Old Man in the Mountain or a bear rather than just a rectangular green sign with a number on them. But the issue that you brought up is why this can't be, or why it'd be better done by the professionals at DOT and involved with the design rather than just a charity.
Thank you.
See no further questions. Thank you very much, Representative. I would like to recognize Deputy Police Chief Scott McKinley, who's asked for 20 minutes, and I don't think we'll need you more than 3, hopefully.
Good morning. The reason why I put 20 is I have no
With
idea
I saw you had a question mark there, and I was like,
what
yeah,
kind of questions
yeah.
are going to be asked. So,
welcome to Public Works, sir.
well, this is my first adventure down here doing something like this in 34 years in law enforcement. I spent a lot of time in Lincoln. This is my second stint. Back in the 90s, Believe it or not, we had the same issue, that we had no mile markers or anything to help visitors, not only the ones in our own state, the New England area, in our own country, but visitors from throughout the world who come and visit our lovely community. We have an incident up on the Kank. They have a hard time telling us where it is. So by the time we get our apparatus up there, police, fire, EMS, it may not even be in our jurisdiction. So now what we've done is we've moved our emergency services to a desolate part of our community, and then we get another call. So now we're coming back because we don't have the proper information to put people out there. I started this issue with the state. I've actually reached out to William Lambert, who was the traffic engineer administrator for New Hampshire DOT back in 2022. And I was told, unfortunately, there's no money. So I sent another email in 2023, same response. 2024, same response. And I reached out with Linda Massimilla, and I asked her for some assistance. And she said she was going to work on it. She did not get reelected. And then just recently, Representative Stringham had advised that he had put forth a bill, which I 150% support. I believe that we need this in our community, and this affects 112 all the way from Bath, New Hampshire, all the way over to Conway. There are no mile markers on that roadway whatsoever. It's a safety issue. So that's kind of why we're here. He talked about the cell service. There is none, as you know, anybody that spent time up in that area. And we just want to be able to send the services responsibly to where they need to be without jeopardizing responding to other incidents that are in our jurisdiction.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Chief. Any questions? Representative Faulkner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your experience, has the Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, been aware of this issue or involved in this question at all?
I have brought this up to our local law enforcement representatives for the Forest Service, and I got some pushback saying that it would unbeautify the roadway, which I totally understand. The Kank is a beautiful area, but it's a very unsafe area at times when we have emergency situations. My chief just indicated to me that I failed to mention that we have issues with radios as well. So when we get out on the Kank, sometimes we can't even communicate to our own dispatch. We have to relay our conversations through another fire apparatus or emergency vehicle that might be coming to where we are, and then they forward it to our dispatch. We dispatch at Lincoln Police Department, Linwood Ambulance, the fire department. We also call out for services for towing, et cetera. And we also assist with communications with the U.S. Forest Service as well. We work very well together.
Thank you. Representative Bogert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I'm not sure, but was it true at one time the Kangamangas during the winter was not cleaned up or anything? It was left kind of like closed due to the natural.
I don't know when that was. I believe it was in maybe the 40s. They closed it because they were having issues with cleaning. The only road that's closed in that area would be Bear Notch Road. So in reference to that DOT does a wonderful job. The snowbanks are extremely high, as he's saying. They're probably sometimes 7 or 8 feet tall. But I think if we work together as a team, we can make sure that those mile markers stay unobstructed so people will have a reference point that they can share with us when they call an emergency.
Thank Representative Newman.
I hope this is a brief question. If there's no cell service and no mile markers currently, how do people that have had a situation get through to you?
Sometimes they describe, they'll say, you know, by that big rock or by the hiking area on the sharp corner. We know that's the hairpin. A lot of times it's a guessing game. We'll head out there, we'll send a police unit, and we'll go up to that location trying to confirm that there's an issue. I've gone all the way over to past Sabaday Falls where we stop patrolling. We cover Livermore all the way to Sabaday, and I've not found a crash that they reported because it actually happened 5 miles further towards the Conway side. So this is a delay in getting emergency services where they need to be, which we all know that every second that we delay an ambulance could cost somebody their life. And that is the biggest reason why I'm very passionate about this. And I will push and push and push until I retire to get mile markers out on that roadway.
Thank you very much. Yes, one follow-up, please.
Yes, but how do they get in touch with you to tell you it's by a big rock or
So
whatever?
they don't get cell service until Loon Mountain, or there's this one little tiny spot up by CL Graham that sometimes if you stand in the right location and hold your phone up, that you might be able to get a message out to somebody. So, you know, we're hoping with technology, we have some, you know, we have a lot of things moving forward technology-wise that'll make this easier, possibly with GPS. But we need to do the responsible thing as a state and explore this and get some mile markers out there so we can get services where they need to be.
Understood. Thank you very much. One question, Mr. Melvin, Representative Melvin.
Could you tell me how many service calls you get out there a year?
Well, I had my dispatch supervisor pull up our statistics, and I will tell you that because we go out there for all sorts of different things. We patrol it, obviously. On average, it looked 300 plus calls per year. And those are, you know, responses to a crash, somebody calling in a reckless driver, somebody parked in the wrong space. I mean, it's medical calls. I could break it down. If I need to come back and speak some more and talk hours, I can do that too.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to call from the DOT, Lee Baronis. Thank you, sir. Welcome to Public Works.
Thank you. It seems like this was just last Tuesday out before you. So thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Lee Baronis. I'm the administrator of the Bureau of Traffic at DOT and state traffic engineer. Among other things, Bureau of Traffic is responsible for signs, and that's why I'm here to speak to you today. The department does not take any position on this bill, but I'm here to provide some basic information and to answer questions from the perspective of DOT. I will try to be brief, recognizing the time. So we're all in the same language, mile markers, sometimes called mile posts. Our prevailing authority on this matter is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, published by US DOT and is applicable to all public roadways. That manual calls them reference location signs or enhanced reference location signs, but I'll call them mile markers for convenience. These signs, I think we all are familiar with them. They display the miles from the originating point of the route. The enhanced signs also include a route shield and the cardinal direction, north, south, east, west. For the purpose of this, it would say 112 with the shield with north, east, or west on it, and it would have the mileage from the origin in Bath. The purpose is to assist a motorist knowing how far they've traveled and the distance to the exit or destination. That's the primary purpose, according to Federal Highway Administration. It's also useful as reference for engineering and maintenance, so we know where we're going to dig out a culvert or what have you. But most importantly is for public safety. Identifies location of an incident, for callers reporting an incident, and for responders to find that incident. So the existing landscape, New Hampshire has a mix of mile markers on roads, interstates and major divided highways. We've been transitioning to the enhanced reference location sign. This is the required sign that you see on, say, Interstate 393, right here in the Concord area. We just had a recent project to update those signs on all but a few of the interstates. Some are Turnpike and Spalding. Haven't had an upgrade as yet, but they're being done as projects allow. But we handled 93, 393, 293, and 101 with all new signs. So that's the current standard. There are other roads on the National Highway System, both divided and undivided, that have a mix of older style signs, ones that aren't necessarily compliant with the current rules. You'll see some smaller units, say mile, and sometimes you'll see even smaller ones that have intermediate markings. They're everywhere, but they're not everywhere. And they're out there, but they are no longer compliant. Mile markers are required to be at every mile according to the manual uniform traffic control devices, but they do allow intermediate signs. Here in New Hampshire and nearby states, we use 0.2 of a mile as our intervals, and so that's what you'll see on the interstate. The advantage of them at closer intervals is if you have to walk to find the nearest sign, you're not walking a full mile, you're walking at most 0.2 of a mile. On the interstates with open sight lines, you can sometimes see from one to another, even at night. And on the interstates, we've got them back to back on both sides of the highway when it's divided, so that you can see the nearest one may be behind you. Let's see, our focus has been on the higher volume roadways, where the value of them does the most good for the most people, but they also provide values on all roadways. And as we've heard from testimony here, particularly on roads with few other landmarks and identifiers. So I am personally an advocate for mile markers. I think that they do provide a lot of value. Let's see, the legislation, the proposed legislation specifies mile markers at 1 mile intervals along the full length of New Hampshire 112, also known as Kankamangus Highway, from Lincoln to Conway. And the intended benefit is principally for public safety. Some key notes. New Hampshire 112 runs from Bath to Conway. The legislation kind of mixes things, says full length of 112, but also says Lincoln to Conway. For the assumptions for the fiscal note, I referred to Lincoln to Conway. And to be a little more specific, I assume the start in Lincoln would be at the White Mountain National Forest boundary, going east to Route 16 in Conway. It did specify 1 mile intervals. We recommend 0.2 of a mile, but the fiscal note is based on 1 mile. But I also included, and I'm not sure if it got into what you saw, an estimate for at 0.2. We also assume the signs will comply with the MUTCD, which will be the same size as on the divided highways. We're assuming only on one side of the road, because it is a two-way road. and that they would have back-to-back signs so that each direction can see the signs. One direction you'll be on the right, the other direction will be on the left. So those were the assumptions. So basically, the advantages, like I said, I'm an advocate for mile markers. I wish I could spend my retirement putting mile markers up around the state. There's plenty of work to do. The addition of mile markers would, well, we've heard that testimony. There's a lot of advantages to it, in addition to for engineering and maintenance. So the other folks, non-emergency folks, have references. We do recommend the 0.2 mile interval. Some of the drawbacks, and unfortunately I always have to talk about things like that. The project, there's only so much money, and this project would displace money from other projects that are already programmed through the established prioritization project. Another drawback is impact on scenic vistas. Unfortunately, we can't change the face of the signs. They are required to be that way, just like a stop sign has to be red, 8-sided, and so forth. Our reference location signs have to meet these criteria. And the other, I guess the biggest drawback is kind of a fairness thing, is there's an expectation of similar signs on other roads. This is proposed for the Kankamangas. We've got lots of other roads that could also use them. US 3, Lancaster to Pittsburgh. Route 9, Keene to Hopkinton. 26, Colebrook to Errol. 25C, Piermont to Warren. 16, Bartlett to Gorham. It goes on and on. Also, New Hampshire 112 from Lincoln east to Bath. Like everything, there's a lot of things we want to do, and there's only so much we can do with the money that we have. So we have a prioritization process through the GASSET. And so that's really my concern, is legislating the priorities when there's already an established priority. However, I do feel strongly that they provide value. This is certainly an eligible road and would be worthy. And then I'll have to deal with the next town that comes and says, what about our road? So, any questions?
Representative Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for appearing. What's the funding source for this road? And the second question would be, does the MUTCD have any may or shall or language that would guide us as to whether these should be installed?
Okay. Funding is, normally we would take federal funding when we can take it. This would be eligible for federal funding one way or another. We do have a constrained program, and so if you take federal funds for this, it's less federal funds for a bridge or a sidewalk or something else. We could also use state funds if we've had earmarked funds for projects before. We certainly don't turn down any source of funds, as long as it's legitimate. But for the assumption, we were assuming it was federal funds. As far as mays and shalls in the regulation, you are not required to have mile markers. However, if you do, they are required to be either of the form that's called a reference location sign or the enhanced reference location sign. And those are the green and white. The simpler ones just say mile and then have a mile number in vertical on the side of the road. We have used the enhanced on the interstates because it helps folks know what road they're on. It also helps reinforce which direction you're going in, because you see north or east, every 0.2 of a mile. So our preference, our recommendation is to use the enhanced signs.
Any further questions? Representative Bogert.
Could you provide a best guess estimate of what the cost of this would be?
It's in the fiscal note.
Yeah, and just so you don't have to look it up, we
is?
had roughly 288,000 would be at the 1 mile interval, and about 580,000 for them at 0.2 of a mile.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. thank you very much for your testimony, sir. And at this point in time, I'd like to close the public hearing on House Bill 713. Which brings us to opening up the hearing for House Bill 745, naming a bridge in the city of Keene after Charles Redfern. And I would like to recognize Representative Philip Jones. Welcome to Public Works, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my first bill to come before this committee, so I thank you for having me, and thank you to all the members of the committee. It's great to be here. My name is Philip Jones, Representative, New Hampshire State Representative, Cheshire District 3. I'm also in my 28th year as a city councilor in Keene, and I'm also on the board of directors of Pathways for Keene, a nonprofit organization. I'm here today to talk to you about RSA 3:43, which deals with naming a state facility. I'm requesting an alternative use trail bridge in Keene, New Hampshire be named the Charles Redfern Bridge. It's a 340-foot span. It was proposed in 2015, finished in 2018. It was done completely by the state of New Hampshire, and for that, I thank you. You've been very good to us. This, since its completion, this bridge has seen thousands of walkers, bikers, snowmobilers, horseback riders, and so on. In Keene, we have a great system of bridges and alternative use paths, and we're very proud of that there. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we're going to tell you a little bit about Charles Redfern. Our system is very well planned use trail system. When it comes to discussion about planning the developing of the Keene trail system, Charles Redfern is the Mr. Everything. 30 years ago, Charles Redfern had a vision for a trail system using mostly former rail beds. At that time, the city father said, "Show me the money." Charles did just that. He was a founding charter member of a nonprofit organization, which he called Pathways for Keene. The organization's sole purpose was to raise money to pay for the development and maintenance of the entire city alternative use trail network. Thanks to Pathways for Keene, mostly through the dedicated, tedious work of Charles Redfern, millions of dollars were raised via private donation to fund this well-planned extensive trail system. Without the vision, the tenacity, and the dedicated efforts of Charles Redfern, there would be no alternative use trail system in Keene. This bridge is on the south side of Keene, so we never gave it a name. It was the only bridge on the south side, so we called it the South Bridge, and we just referred to that. Coming up within the next 4 years, there's going to be 3 more bridges coming up on the south side of Keene, so it loses that geographic significance that we have. One of us, we're reusing, if any of you from the Londonderry area, the Prowse Bridge. We bought that for $1. If we didn't pay that yet, my wife gave me $1 today, I'll give it to you. And we would, so there goes that designation as South Bridge. So it's a bridge with no name right now. Charles Redfern has done everything he could for our trails within New Hampshire. Right now, he is in Florida preparing to sell his property down there because he's trying to prepare for some health issues coming up, which I really don't want to get into. I would like to see this bridge named after Charles. I know some past practices is that the person has to be not living anymore. I would like to see, I know that's not in the RSA, and I would like to see this happen. I think it would be great if he could take, he has a grandson who's handicapped, who Charles and his wife have refurbished a van so it's can use handicap facilities, and they take this grandson everywhere. I think it would be great if Charles could take his grandson push him in his wheelchair over that bridge and say, yes, they named this after me, and not have to one day push his grandson over that bridge and say, your grandfather's gone, but we would like to, but that bridge was named after him. Charles Redfern does not even know that I'm here today. He does not know about this bill right now. I know this is a public process, but we were just trying to keep it a surprise as much as we could. And that being said, I know you received communications from the Keene City Manager, the Keene City Mayor, a number of Keene City councilors, someone from the Board of Education, people from the Pathways for Keene, people from the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Everyone in the community is in full support of this. I would have liked to have a letter from the full city council, but that would have been publicly notified, and then Mr. Redfern would have found out about this and would have ruined the surprise. I would rather wait till after you executive this bill before he even knows about this. I would gladly entertain any questions, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, any questions? Representative Faulkner.
Yes, thank you. Representative Jones, could you describe a little bit more about Redfern's history? I know he was he has a career working for the state as former city councilor, a few other things other than just his bike path experience.
Thank you for that question. It's a very good one. And actually, he worked for the New Hampshire Department of Revenue as an auditor, and he brought in millions of dollars to the state. So this would help be a payback for him. Yeah. He was on the city council, and I served with him. And he's not a political guy. He's kind of apolitical, but he did that because he wanted to see some of these trails get passed through the city council level, and he did a great job of doing that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would like to recognize Edward Haas, please. Introduce yourself, please, and welcome to Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Edward Haas. I'm from Keene. I also serve as a city councilor, along with my colleague, Representative Jones. Charles Redfern has a long history in New Hampshire, as Rep. Jones referred to, as an auditor. That was his career, and he is retired from that now. At the same time, he picked up the reins in Keene, serving as city councilor. He continues to serve on our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So it's rare is a city meeting that he's not there. The background of all of this, you'll recall, we're all used to having rail trails today that are converted, and now there's different fundraising, that how they get maintained and how they're brought along. But we all know the benefit of having abandoned railways converted into recreational use. When Charles Redfern started this work, there was no such thing. It was only less than 20 years prior to when he started this work that the rails were still active in Keene. So the rails went out of business in Keene sometime in the 70s, and all of these rail lines lay fallow and eventually would have been carved up into different divisions, into different commercial occupancies, residential occupancies, whatever. But all the properties would have been carved up. But he saw this opportunity right out of the box back, I think it was over 30 years ago. And as was described, he went to the city. The city said, hey, it's not for us to do, you do it. And he did. He went right out and started pounding the pavement, and he continues to do that in support of the trail. So we know how the trails have evolved over the years. Right now, this trail, this bridge, is a key connector from Walpole and farther north all the way down through Keene, Swansea, and down into Winchester, eventually down into Massachusetts as well. The trails are a true revenue driver for the city, and they are maintained as such through the efforts of fellows like Mr. Redfern with the Pathways for Keene program and continual fundraising. He also supports the other groups that use these chairs, but not only cyclists and pedestrians, but the snowmobile organizations are very key in supporting and maintaining these trails. Just as Rep. Jones referred to, Mr. Redfern is suffering some illnesses, and we'd love to have this on his desk before as soon as possible. And he still is going to be fundraising. He's out there all the time. He's helping make these things continue and be of value. No one deserves this more than Chuck Redfern. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. You said you're a city councilor, sir?
Yes.
Okay, and we don't have a letter yet, as of yet, and I understand why. But did I understand somebody has from the city manager or something has sent us testimony?
I understand.
An email?
And I have verbal information that the city manager, the city mayor, various members of the bicycle pedestrian committee, various members of some neighborhood groups that I'm affiliated with. There is no one, if asked, that would not support this move, this change, this naming.
Thank you. The letter has been brought to my attention.
Which letter is that?
City of Keene from Jay Kahn, the mayor.
Okay.
That's good enough for us. That's one of our requirements. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. And at this point in time, I would like to recognize Mr. John Hayes, please. Come forward, state your name for the record, and welcome to Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Hayes. I've been a resident of Keene for about 25 years, and I'm a longtime user of the multi-use trails. I'll call them bike trails in Keene. Charles, I'll call Chuck Redfern, has worked tirelessly to develop and improve the multi-use trails in and around Keene. Well, he served as a city councilor for many years. His I'll call it amateur career because he did it for the love of it. As a bike trail advocate, started well before his days as a city councilor and continued well after it. I first met Chuck while we both worked for the Department of Revenue Administration, and we commuted together between Keene and Concord. And he convinced me to serve on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, a committee that advised City Council on bike path issues, as well as Pathways for Keene, a 501c3 that raises money for bike path projects, and currently the Monadnock Rail Trail Consortium. It was through my work on all these different organizations that I got to see how hard Chuck works for Keene and the region's bike path system. He is relentless in trying to accomplish the next goal for completing the next project. He is always the #1 fundraiser. He's always skilled at the politics of building bike trails, and he was always respectful of other stakeholders' points of view and always included them in decision making. In short, if you name any segment of the rail trail system in Keene, Chuck Redfern had a hand in bringing it to fruition. Keene is very lucky that Chuck Redfern chose to devote his life to bike trail advocacy, because without him, Keene would not have been able to build such a comprehensive and beautiful bike path system. So I'm definitely in favor of naming the bridge over 101-1012 the Charles Redfern Bridge. And certainly, if any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Do we have any questions this time? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. And I would like to close the public hearing on House Bill 745. We got a couple of other housekeeping items to go here, but for right now, I'd like to have a brief 5-minute Republican caucus in the back office, please. And the Democrats are welcome to a little 5-minute bathroom break or another caucus.
You guys don't live far from each other.
All right, I don't know.
I'm sorry. That's why Mr. Shea is here. Tuesdays and Wednesdays anymore.
Okay.
HHS has Wednesdays.
Oh.
Thursdays, we have session. Is it Mondays or Fridays?
What happened to Tuesday?
And recognize Representative Jack for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move retain on House Bill 100.
Have a motion to retain and seconded by Representative Bone. Jack.
If I could just raise one more point, the fact during the hearing, we learned that there are outstanding loans from the revolving loan fund. And this bill could very well throw a wrench into those. There are loans both to the Conway Scenic Railroad and the Cog Railway that are outstanding.
Seeing no further questions, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Representative Melvin,
Yes.
Representative Fidolfi,
Representative Fidolfi.
Representative Kaczynski.
Kaczynski said yes.
Oh, okay.
Mike's on, please.
Representative Bogert,
Yes. Yes.
Representative Bohm,
Yes.
Representative Brown,
Yes.
Representative Lewis is not here, Representative Suter is not here, Representative Cloutier.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Edgar,
Aye.
Representative Faulkner,
Yes.
Representative Newman,
Yes.
Representative Vallone,
Yes.
Representative Juris,
Yes.
Representative Rockmore.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman votes yes.
the vote is 15-0.
15-0. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to open the executive session on House Bill 745, naming a bridge in the city of Keene after Charles Redfern, and recognize Representative Melvin for a motion, please.
I recommend OTP.
Do I have a second? Representative Faulkner seconds. We'll open this for discussion. I'll start out by saying it was recognized normally, just as a matter of precedent on this committee, we wait until somebody is deceased before we try to name after anything after him, or we'd be deluged with these kind of bills. However, there has been precedent before, at least twice that I know in this committee. Representative Wazorek was one of them in Manchester, and I forget the gentleman's name up north. Ray Burton. We named something after him for the same reasons as this committee is pushing this bill forward. That and the fact that normally we always insist on having a letter from the town, and it sounded like they had to be a little secretive about this. However, Representative Edgar found the letter from the mayor, so that's good enough for me as far as I'm concerned. Having that, I'll recognize Representative Jack.
Thank you. We also did this for Ruth Griffin while she was living.
So Representative Faulkner.
One other piece of information that Representative Jones said he forgot to mention is that the Redfern name is well known in Keene. He was former president of Keene State College. And this bridge is located on, both ends of it are on Keene State, or adjacent to Keene State property, so everybody knows the honoree here in town. I think it's a very appropriate designation, given his history, his career, and the use of the bridge. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
if I
Representative
may.
Cloutier.
Representative Faulkner referred to Leo Redfern, Charles's father, and Leo Redfern was my college president during my college career at Keene State and retired the year I graduated. And later on, they named the Performing Arts Center at Keene for him, the Redford Center. So this is a great compliment to the recognition of not only Leo, but now his son, Charles. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the vote roll.
This is on ought to pass. Representative Melvin.
Aye.
Representative Fidolfi. Representative Kaczynski.
Yes.
Representative Bogert.
Yes.
Representative Bolton.
Yeah.
Representative Brown.
Yes.
Representative Cloutier.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Edgar.
Aye.
Representative Faulkner.
Yes.
Representative Newman.
Yes.
Representative Vallone.
Yes.
Representative Juris.
Yes.
Representative Rockmore.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman,
Chair votes yes.
the vote is 15-0.
The executive session is closed.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
consent, we want to put on consent or
Well,
regular?
I wanted to inquire to the gentleman first.
Okay, sure, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close the executive session on House Bill 745. Gentlemen, we can put this on a consent calendar where it will just, be brought up at a consent vote, or if you'd like to attend, we can have it put on the regular calendar and he can be in the audience and we'll try and special order it to the beginning of the session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if he'll be back from Florida at the time, but if we do do it from the floor, I know there's people from Keene that would want to be there in attendance. But if it's easier for you to put it on the consent agenda, that's fine with me.
We normally.
Yeah, but we usually have them there for the House vote. But that's correct. We can always have them there for the Senate votes too. So I think
So consent would be fine.
consent would be fine.
Yes.
Do we have any objections to put it on the consent calendar from anyone? No? Let's put it on the consent calendar.
Thank you.
I think that's all I had. Like I said, I'm going to schedule next Tuesday, starting at 10 to exec. And once again, my intention is to get us out around lunchtime. So I'm going to schedule these execs for 15 minutes each, and we'll be out of here by noon again.
Well, one after the other.
One after the other. I could time them. Yeah, I could put them all at the same time.
Joe, you're on the hook for the committee report?
Yeah, thank you.
Joe? Joe's doing the committee report, yes.
Charlie,
Yeah, okay.
did you call him Joe?
I might have. Joe Melvin was one of my managers, so, sorry.
Chairman, did I do that right?
Yes, and you're gonna write
Got this one, got this one.
a little blurb for passing the
Paper clips.
There being no further business, y'all can go home, I guess, unless you want to hang around and talk.
Mr. Chair, good job again but we got through.